If you love Rageblade, then I've got great news for you. Set 12 has broken the TFT record for the most Rageblade users in a single set, almost having triple the users than Set 11 and Set 10. Set 12 also clears the previous record holder, Set 9, and what's even more interesting is that stacking Rageblades is incredibly powerful and viable for many units like back in Set 9. I mean, you know it's bad when the set isn't even out yet and players are already complaining. But while I can agree with some of these complaints, let's first go over all of the users of Rageblade, why some of the users can abuse more than one, and truly judge whether or not Rageblade is OP in Set 12. But first, videos like this take a lot of research. I even plotted some graphs for Jinx because she has a really interesting ults, but we'll get to this in a second. Regardless, I'd greatly appreciate it if you subscribe so I can keep on doing research like this. So let me just list all the potential users of Rageblade in Set 12, which is around 17 unique units. Briefly, that's Twitch, Warwick, Ashe, Cassiopeia, Kog'Maw, Kassadin, Galio's hero augment Deja, Nilah, Tristana, shockingly mages like Zilean and Syndra, but we'll cover that more in a second, Jinx, Kalista, Ryze, Varus, Smolder, and Milio. So Rageblade is seemingly extremely flexible in Set 12 with so many early and late game users of this item. However, is it truly best in slot for all of these units? Well, let's get into that. Firstly, let's look at Warwick. Despite gaining attack speed from his passive, he absolutely loves building Rageblade to keep autoing, dealing damage, and healing. However, not everyone is great with Rageblade. A great instance of this is Twitch, who is supposedly an attack carry, but his base attack speed is low and his ult does not contribute towards stacking it. Frankly, the game label and recommendation here is wrong. Twitch is an attack caster who wants damage multiplying items to burst his target. And this is also true for Kog'Maw, who is also labeled as an attack carry while functionally being more akin to an AD caster. Hence, while Kog'Maw can use Rageblade, he can also use items like Shojin or Red Buff instead to upkeep his ult's bonus attack speed. Ideally, you just want to keep Kog'Maw ulting. Conversely, there's Kassadin, who loves the scaling item like Rageblade or Arcane Jaws, as that enables him to scale exponentially with his stacking passive magic damage. For Kassadin, the safest way to keep him scaling is through Quicksilver or artifacts like Zhonya or RFC. But intrinsically, Rageblade is an ideal item on units that scale well with attack speed. For example, while Nora can use Rageblade, she prefers more upfront attack speed or AP. Rageblade is neither an optimal casting or damage item for her. But while you may think that's also true for Milio, he actually uses Rageblade very well due to Scholar. But realistically, Milio is a support unit, and so whenever you play him, give him whatever you can so you can give your team more items. Any mana generation or attack speed does the job for Milio. There are so many units that scale well with attack speed in this set, even AP units like Ryze. And there are some units like Nilah who can accelerate her Rageblade stacking through her passive, which also helps her stack items like Titans faster. However, Rageblade Nilah is best in conjunction with an emblem like Multi-Striker or Pyro, otherwise pure damage is seemingly far better. And that's also true for fairer units like Tristana and Kalista if they're also in the possession of the Queen's Crown. And I'm going to elaborate on this because while Tristana is an AD caster like Kog'Maw and Twitch, she actually uses Rageblade well due to Queen's Crown. As the crown gives you damage amp anyway, items like Red Buff and Giant Slayer are slightly worse because the damage amplifiers are additive. To maximize Tristana's damage, you should be aiming for more multiplicative damage like higher AD, more crit, or more attacks. But moving on to Varus, his core items are damage amplifying items to maximize his burst, like Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, and Giant Slayer. But then Varus will want an item to enable his casting. Shojin and Red Buff are the default choices here for Varus, as his ult channel is quite long and does not allow him to stack Rageblade. So Rageblade is not best in slot for Varus. But if you slammed the Rageblade in the early game and then got gifted a Varus too, it's not the end of the world to give him a Rageblade. And as it turns out, some mages can also use Rageblade well due to their high base attack speed. Of course, there's the aforementioned scholars like Ryze and Milio who use Rageblade well as they effectively turn the item into Shojin at 4 Scholar. But also Ryze in particular loves Rageblade as it also substantially increases his damage output. But you may already know that, so let's talk about mages that you wouldn't expect to be good with Rageblade. One of the most noticeable examples of this is the previously mentioned burst unit, Syndra. With the introduction of mana banking in Set 12, which I'll cover more in depth in another video, mages with a low cast time ability use Rageblade very well as they resume autoing quickly, which is great in conjunction with Shojin. Syndra especially wants to cast as much as possible as he passively scales for more casts. Thus, in the early game and in prolonged combats, Rageblade will allow Syndra to minimize her downtime between casts and stack faster. Many Syndra comps are just her and Cassiopeia with a massive frontline like Bastions, Vanguards or Shapeshifters, depending on whatever you hit on rolldowns. So with a beefy frontline, Syndra is usually safe to scale. In these cases, Rageblade becomes a superior attack speed item than Nash's Tooth, and these graphs demonstrate that Rageblade is always ahead of Nash's Tooth on Syndra, and then Rageblade will also overtake Red Buff in around 11 seconds. Basically, Red Buff has more upfront damage while Rageblade allows Syndra to hyperscale. However, an issue with these builds is your overall item economy, as getting multiple rods and bows can be difficult. But now let's talk about Zilean. Like Syndra, Zilean has a minute cast animation and so can resume autoing very quickly. However, the problem with Rageblade Zilean is that oftentimes his frontline cannot stall for long enough for him to scale. And despite Chrono freezing time briefly so Zilean can scale for free, you still kinda prefer upfront casting to make that Chrono freeze happen sooner. Also, Adaptive Helm has a vastly superior synergy with Preserver, and so is the better mana generating item for Zilean. But most importantly, Zilean is heavily contested and you will struggle trying to 3-star him as his trait tree is incredible. But now let's discuss which units of the aforementioned 17 abuse Rageblade to the point that they benefit from stacking it. And you may be thinking, why would you ever stack Rageblade? Well, Rageblade stacks exponentially with other sources of attack speed, including other Rageblades. The more attack speed you gain results in faster stacking, which then results in more attack speed. And if there's any temporary or permanent boost to the attack speed through items, abilities or traits, then Rageblade will stack even faster during those boosts. Having said that, building double Rageblade severely lacks upfront damage, and so only units that gain damage from their traits can fully capitalize on stacking Rageblade. That brings us on to the most prolific abuser of double Rageblade, and certainly the one you'll see the most, which is Kalista. Every auto, Kalista will embed spears into her primary target and then 2 nearby enemies every third auto. So with more attack speed, she will embed far more spears and Rend will do so much more damage. But that's also alongside the fairy item, which provides Kalista with AD, AP and a massive damage amp. And at higher verticals of fairy, your team will have more HP and your primary tank will heal for Kalista's damage, buying more time for her to scale. So Kalista is incredibly self-sufficient with just fairy and some Rageblades, and you don't really need to build a true damage item for her. But moving on from Kalista, there's also Smolder, who has a huge attack speed boost, which again is great for Rageblade, and he has additional damage on his attacks during his ult. Furthermore, if you enable 3 Dragon, then Smolder will heal through each attack. And of course, Blaster makes Smolder do even more damage, and Dragon gives him burn and wound. So stacking Rageblades on Smolder is great to increase his sustain, damage, and reduce his downtime between casts. But for Smolder, a Pyro Spatula is the priority above all else. Now I'll cover Cassiopeia and Galio's hero augment in the same breath because they practically have the same gameplay pattern. For both Cassio and Galio, their autos will give them more AP through Encancer or the hero augment respectively. Thus, more attacks result in more AP and more single target damage. Thus, you should always aim for double Rageblade for these units. But now let's look at the graphs I teased earlier for Jinx. Jinx's ability absolutely adores attack speed, as she will do so much more true damage to her target in the duration. More attack speed results in more true damage, which enables her single target. So let's look at the graphs. This is comparing double Rageblade against Rageblade and Red Buff on Jinx to see which build is better. The assumptions here are that Jinx gets no takedowns and there is no cast time. As you can see, double Rageblade outscales at 9 seconds, which is surprisingly quick. So Jinx is another good user of double Rageblade, especially if she gets any takedowns, as it will hasten her scaling. And that also means that any items, augments or charms that give Jinx more starting mana or attack speed will allow her to snowball faster. For support items like Zeke's, Aegis, and honestly even Chalice. But I will say that takedowns for Jinx are crucial, as she can snowball faster if she continues to reset her ult. Thus, Runans can easily replace a Rageblade, so Jinx can overcome her single target weakness and get as many takedowns as possible. And again, you can kind of see the same story with Ashe. Initially, it does seem like there's some double Rageblade potential for her, especially with her ult being akin to Runans. However, as a one cost, Ashe has low base damage and her traits do not address that. Thus, her items need to increase her damage, and so double Rageblade is not sufficient. There's also the fact that odd amounts of AP like 10, 30 and 50 are great for Ashe, while even amounts are squandered. For example, with just 10 AP, Ashe's ability will gain an entire second rather than 0.5, as TFT will round it up. But all in all, those are all the potential double Rageblade users that I'm currently aware of. Some are incredibly powerful, like Kalista. However, others don't quite meet that power level. Of course, you can use units like Tristana to hold items for Kalista or Twitch for Jinx, but they're just temporary holders. Overall, this number of Rageblade users is actually unprecedented. Both set 11 and set 10 had 7 units each that could use Rageblade. Meanwhile, set 9 was the previous record holder at 13, which is kind of funny because I believe some of the design team behind set 9 is also behind set 12. So that also leads me to wonder if we'll see another Rageblade nerf like we did back in set 9 in patch 13.13. But maybe Riot are happy with the sheer number of Rageblade users in this set. I do certainly feel like that Rageblade shouldn't be viable for some mages like Syndra, and the fact that she can build it and use it well is a massive red flag for me. But this is potentially a consequence of mana banking, which is definitely a step in the right direction for mages. I guess they could just directly nerf Syndra, but I don't think that addresses the sheer flexibility and viability of Rageblade in set 12. And ultimately, I believe Rageblade will be built the most often and second place won't even be remotely close. But at this point, I will pass over the questions to you guys. What do you think about Rageblade? Is it too OP in set 12? Will it get built way too often? And will Riot eventually nerf this item? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me. And as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.